Dr. Khan is an Australian dentist, and he looks at things way different than a lot. And I love the conversation as he brings together how light and melanin and even some, more of the chiropractic type things that make a massive difference, especially for our kiddos.
I had family members that were struggling with health issues, and they were my wife in particular. She was we were taking her to various medical specialists, an endocrinologist, a hematologist, and a this and a that, and a gastroenterologist, and we weren't getting much. Making much headway in her health journey. And so I was scratching my head thinking, we're going to all these specialists and they're all kind of saying, oh, go to see this specialist, go to see this specialist. And it was a little bit frustrating for me because, as a loving husband, I really wanted to do whatever I could to help my wife heal. And so I did, there was a change in my thinking where I stopped outsourcing responsibility for healthcare to somebody else, and I actually onboarded it myself. And I'm like, okay, I understand the jargon of medicine because I'm a dentist. So in my dental training, I've done 2 years of medical lectures. So I understand all the jargon. So why not go and do some reading? And so what happened was I just started to go down the rabbit hole of like holistic health, and did the typical thing of diet and exercise, and was getting some results, moving the needle a little bit, but not really making a big headway. And I was lucky enough for a patient to recommend for me to look into the work of Dr. Jack Kruse. And I get lots and lots of recommendations all the time from patients. It's like, how do you weed out what should I actually go and listen to? What should I actually go and read compared to just ignore it or leave it on the table. But I decided for some reason to go and listen to a few of his podcasts, and they blew me away with the granular detail that he went to in order to stop chronic disease.
Yeah.
And this is when he started to go down into like electrons and protons and how light interacts with them, etc. And I was just like gobsmacked by how detailed his explanations were, and it was really hard for me to wrap my head around. And so I just really continued then with the blog post, with the podcast. I listened to the podcast twice, and my nature is that when I'm really into something, I just have to know everything about it. I have to like completely download the information. So I actually reduced the amount of time that I was working in my dental clinic from 4 days a week down to 2 days a week. And those now extra 2 days a week, I studied. And I just studied and studied and studied. And that's how I came to learn quantum biology to the depth that I do know it now. And that's how implementing those protocols and more, and we might touch on that later, has really helped me help my wife heal herself, which is another lesson for me as well, because I'm not a healer. I'm just helping other people heal themselves. And so these are, Dr. Jack Kruse has been incredible in what he's brought together for so many health clinicians and just people that just want to be healthier. But I think there is still a little bit more than what he lets on, and I'm happy to explore that as well.
Now, I love that. So let's before we get kind of too deep into it, I want to connect and kind of paint that foundation, like where I have been so excited to visit with you is what you're doing. Has a big direct impact for me. So with Lander, my son having cancer, there's a lot of things that I have recently come to be paying attention to. And another dentist that was recently on, Dr. Gould, made the breathing and the sleep apnea and vitamin D connection for me as something that I really have got to line out. I think that's part of the missing piece, and you have hit on that in some other conversations. And so, will you, before we go into kind of the details, lay out what you're doing with the Quantum Kid and a little bit of that basics on why we need to make sure that our babies are set up to thrive. Because in my estimation, they're kind of, we've dealt them a bad hand. And so I think what you've done is amazing.
Awesome. Really, really excited to talk about this. So the Quantum Kid for me is the culmination of like this big vision of mine to offer a style of healthcare which covers all levels throughout the body, from like the skin and the surface all the way down to like the cellular, subcellular level. And so we want to raise a generation of quantum kids who are healthy in their physical body, they're healthy in their mind, and they're healthy in their soul. And we want them to be raised with that alignment. And it fundamentally is pinned off the central concept to, I guess, health, which is that of breathing. Because if you don't take the next breath, it's game over, right? And so what I've come to learn in working alongside this osteopath named Cole Clayton, who's now basically a brother for me, is that primary to our oxygen and carbon dioxide inhalation, exhalation, there's actually another type of breathing, which is the breathing of the cranial bones. And so our cranial bones, they actually just move ever so slightly. And we're taught in mainstream medicine that once we grow up and we're like 20 or 25 and our growth has ceased or stopped, that the cranial bones fuse together. But nothing could be further from the truth. The bones still actually move. And that movement of the bones is critical to optimal health because it does a few things. It helps to drain lymph out of the head. But the other thing that it does is it actually pumps a very important fluid that surrounds our central nervous system called cerebrospinal fluid. Because what happens is that our bones in our head, there's 22 of them, they're connected directly to our tailbone, which is our sacrum, via something called the dura mater. And the dura mater is like a very thin, tight tension membrane that it's connected, anchored into our tailbone, and it connects into our head. And so what happens is our head bones and our tailbones, they're all like moving in synchrony with each other. So we've got this, it's called the craniosacral mechanism or the primary respiratory mechanism. That's why like craniosacral therapists or craniosacral osteopaths are very effective in like helping to heal people, because most of the parasympathetic nerves, which are the nerves that calm us down, they are kind of the opposite to, your adrenaline rush, your fight or flight, which is the sympathetic nerves. All the parasympathetic nerves in our body come out of the head and they come out of the sacrum. And so when they're moving optimally, you have the best chance of like just calming down, which is obviously a topic that ties into like blue light exposure, because blue light into the eyes increases cortisol levels and stress levels, etc. And it activates the parasympathetic nervous system. So one way, it activates the sympathetic nervous system. So one way to calm the sympathetic nervous system down is to upregulate the parasympathetic nervous system, which we can do with blocking blue light, more sun exposure, more grounding, etc. But we also need to have this optimal movement of the craniosacral mechanism. And what is important about this cerebrospinal fluid? So it wraps around the brain and it wraps around the spinal cord, and it's kind of like this shock absorber. So that's why when you're running, your brain isn't banging against the inside of your skull. Like you can still run without hurting your brain because you've got this shock absorber around it. But it isn't just sitting there like without any movement, just stale and static. It is pumping up and down the central nervous system, from the brain down the spine, back up the spine into the brain. And that is how it cleans the lymph out of the head. But there's one other thing about the cerebrospinal fluid. It's mostly water. It's actually being drawn from blood. So it's an ultrafiltrate of blood that the central nervous system makes. And I believe, and it's structured water. So this is where we tie the quantum side of things into it. And so I believe that the cerebrospinal fluid is the seat of the soul. And so when you have that fluid pumping optimally, you have that soul's best expression of itself. In the physical body, in the mind, in the body. And so that's one aspect to the quantum kid. But the second aspect as well is coming to the movement of the cranial bones. If they are locked up, it actually restricts the forward growth of the face, of the upper jaw, of the lower jaw. Because every child, as you know, Logan, you've got 4, they're born with a flat face. And then over time, the jaws grow downwards and forwards out of the face. But what actually allows the growth of the jaws is the engine at the back of their head, which is the movement of the cranial bones. And so if that's locked up for whatever reason, it restricts the forward growth of the jaws, which means that the jaws are not only smaller, but they're further back in the head, which then means the tongue is further back in the head, which constricts the airways, which sets somebody up for snoring or sleep apnea. And so what we do is we actually, the osteopath helps to decompress the head with his gentle manual maneuvers. But at the same time, we have the kids bite on a little mouth guard like appliance while they're sleeping. And just that mere act of biting on that decompresses the head as well. And so that allows the bones to be relaxed and aligned, and then they start to move properly again. And then that facilitates the forward growth of the jaws. So I'm not necessarily an airways focused dentist, which is what a lot of dentists who are very well intentioned and doing good work kind of, promote themselves as. I'm kind of like I like to use the word quantum dentist because I'm just thinking about all the different layers, like I talk to the parents about blue light. I talk to the parents about safe and responsible sun exposure. I talk to the parents about grounding and nature and how that's all really, really important to help calm kids down who are struggling with, attention deficit disorders, that stupid tag which goes around, or nervous system regulation issues. And so I talk with them about that, but I'm also looking at the breathing, but I'm also looking at the head and the mouth and the whole body with my osteopath's help, because the airway itself is really just a functional space between the mouth and the head. So if you get the mouth and the head right, the body knows what to do and it sorts the airway out itself. So I'm not kind of zeroing in and zooming in on the airway. I'm thinking much bigger picture. So our approach, we call a toes to nose approach, because we look at the leg lengths, we look at the hips, we look at the sacrum, we look at the breathing pattern in the chest. We look at the spinal postures, we look at forward head posture, we look at the neck, we look at the head, of course. I look at the mouth, and then we piece all that together in our treatment. And over the course of 12, 18, sometimes 24 months is required, we just get incredible results with the children that we treat. And some of the success stories are even like we just sometimes have to just pinch ourselves and just go like, wow, like how good was that? I didn't think that was possible type thing. And we have parents come back at like one term later from school. So maybe I'm talking 10, 12 weeks. And the teacher's saying to the child, like, who are you? Like, I just don't recognize you. Like, I can't believe it. Wow. Before you were a child that was jumping off the walls, and now, you're happy, you're doing your homework, you're not disrupting other children, etc. And that's got nothing to do with airway and everything to do with nervous system regulation, which happens when you get better regulation, when you get better movement of the bones. Because there's one thing as well. In the base of our cranium, there's lots of little holes that nerves and blood vessels drop through. One of them is the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is a really important nerve for like calming us down, rest and digest. It's important for breathing. It's important for the brain-gut connection. So what happens if the two bones through which the vagus nerve drops through are compressed. It limits the nerve flow. And in limiting the nerve flow, it's kind of like you have a bend or a kink in the garden hose. So there's not enough water traveling through. So when you decompress the skull, all of a sudden the vagus nerve comes back online because it's got lots of nerve flow. So that's how we help a lot of parents with issues like bedwetting, for instance. Because bedwetting is a very common thing that we see in our clinic, and most of the time we can help parents deal with that within 3 months.
So what can we do if we don't have access to your clinic? I want to know that as a parent, like what can I do to help set up my 4 babies to better be able to adapt? Obviously, I'm not able to just jump on a plane and take him to Australia, unfortunately. But
Yep.
That's because you're just kind of talking to a lot of the things that we do, the sleep apnea, the mouth breathing, I can see, and that is something I would be willing to bet not very many people have heard of, the process that you just went through. So what as a parent can we do to help mitigate some of this?
It's a great question. And the best thing you can do is you can take your children to see a manual therapist that does cranial work. Because they can, particularly with like the younger kids, like even the older kids as well, but like, I mean, you've got kids from like 3 to 10, like you take them and they can just gently work on the head. It's a very gentle head massage, essentially. There's no like, fast cracking or popping of like, the neck, etc. when you see a cranial osteopath particularly. And they are just able to mobilize the bones and just get them moving symmetrically as one. And that will facilitate the growth of the jaws. Like I had a mother bring her 2 boys in the other day, and she just wanted an assessment. And I had a look inside the boys' mouths. I'm like, there's nothing for me to do. Like, the jaw development is perfect. Their faces are symmetrical. The eyes are level with each other. Sometimes you see like kids with one eye higher than the other. I'm like, there's nothing for me to do. And so I asked, what have you been doing? Like, there's obviously like, what's the magic potion? And she said, well, I have been taking my kids for cranial work ever since they were born. Wow. There you go. So, so like, that's something which I would like prioritize. I recommend that for all parents. And my kids are 7 and 4. And if I knew what I know now, I would have left the hospital and pretty much gone straight to the cranial worker. Just because, I mean, let's talk a little bit about what can impact or jam up the movement of the bones. It's trauma. And so there's lots of different types of trauma. It could be a birth trauma. It could be a very long labor for mum, or it could be a labor that was like, almost about to progress and baby was going to be born, but there was a failure to progress, which is like a medical term for like, now we need to go into like an emergency C-section. So then you need to pull baby back through and then out through tummy. It could be a forceps delivery of the baby, where you actually have to use some sort of apparatus like a forceps or a vacuum and attach it to baby's head in order to help deliver baby. But that's going to impact the cranial bone motion. It could be just growing up and, having a sports injury. It could be climbing on the monkey bars and tripping or slipping and banging your head. It could be a car vehicle accident, motor vehicle accident. It could be a whiplash. It could be a concussion playing NFL. It could be any of those things. And what happens is that jams up the cranial bones, which then restricts the movement of the jaws, growth of the jaws, which makes the jaws small, which then leads to crowded teeth. So what I'm saying, Logan, is that crowded teeth are a symptom of some sort of jamming up further back. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense. It's crazy. This is the first time I've ever heard anything like this, though. Is you?
Awesome, because that's what I want to do. I want to change paradigms. I want to redefine how orthodontics is done globally. So what happens, Logan, when you have misaligned teeth in a jammed up head? It's actually the body's intelligence doing what it needs to do in order to help that child survive, breathe, eat, walk, run. Because the mouth is really important in posture. There are 4 postural senses. The eyes, of course. You've got the ears and the vestibular system, the balancing system in the ears. You've got your feet feeling the floor, but the 4th postural sensor is the teeth biting together. And so when you have a misaligned or crowded smile, it is like one tooth is a little bit further forward, another tooth is a little bit rotated, another tooth is rotated a different way, one tooth might be a little bit higher or lower, etc. And we might look at that and think that doesn't look really nice, you know. But what I'm saying is that that's functional. The body has done that on purpose. So who are we to go and break the laws of nature and move those teeth into a different position? Because the body's intelligence has put those teeth there. Body's not dumb, as you know. Nature doesn't make mistakes, Logan. And so what really happens is that in our profession, orthodontics, dentistry, and it's also a demand from society now, is everybody wants straight teeth. So we take those teeth from a misalignment that is functional and we move it into an alignment that is dysfunctional. And so now the cranium's like, what did you do that for, Logan? Like, I needed the teeth there, but you moved them over there. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to move them back. And so then the cranium moves the teeth back, sometimes all the way, sometimes partially. And that's the body's intelligence saying, no, I don't want them there. I want them there. And so that's what we would call orthodontic relapse, where the straightening of teeth relapses back to the way that it was. Because the cranium is king. The cranium always wins. But then we got super smart as a profession because we were like, okay, let's put a wire behind the teeth. Or let's get that person to wear retainers while they're sleeping. And so like there's like so many cases where like I have, you know, adults come in and they've got the front 6 teeth like splintered together with a wire behind, top and bottom. And basically what that does is it locks up the cranial bone motion, because particularly with the upper jaw is actually in 2 halves like this, and this is how it moves. But if you've got a wire across that crosses the midline from these 3 teeth on this side to these front 3 teeth on this side, then it locks up the movement. It just can't move. And so that locks up the entire cranial mechanism. And so like I take those off for breakfast every morning because I'm really passionate about educating patients about that. So we got smart. We put this wire behind that locks up the cranial bone motion. So now the craniums can't actually move the teeth back to where they were. So, but the cranium's got to win somewhere. So it's like, okay, something else has got to give. Left jaw joint, C1, cervical spine 1, left hip, you know, right shoulder. And then that person is like in this, like stuck in this pain for the rest of their life. And they'll go and see a physical therapist, a chiropractor, an osteopath, and they'll get their adjustment and they'll feel great. But because the teeth have been locked in with the braces and the retainers, or the Invisalign and the retainers, that closes the postural circuit. So next time they go and have a meal, they just slip back into those misalignments which they just got out of from the manual therapist. And the only way they're going to win is if they go and see a dentist that knows and thinks the way that I do, which, as you can appreciate, is pretty hard to find.
Are you seeing interest from other dentists or other healthcare practitioners that are paying attention to this?
Slowly but surely, I am. Not necessarily from dentists, because what I'm basically doing is kind of piecing together how the mouth is key for optimal health. And it's a big learning curve for dentists, because I'm taking them away from just drilling and filling into like this whole new space. And they just don't necessarily have the interest or the time to be able to make that big jump, because it is like a quantum leap in terms of how they're thinking about things. So not much interest from dentists, but I am getting a lot of interest from like other chiropractors, osteopaths, functional medicine doctors, just holistic health practitioners, which is great because they're kind of seeing that they're kind of appreciating now that posture is critical to optimal health, because posture means the fascia are nice and aligned. And the fascia is the quantum communication highway, because fascia contains all the water in our body. And like everyone talks about structured water in the quantum health space, but is that structured water able to like carry the information that is being asked of it? That can only happen if your fascia and your posture is good. Otherwise, you're literally going to have like a derailing of the train line somewhere. So there's a greater awareness slowly but surely, and like I'm grateful that folks like yourself are sharing your platform for me to just spread it as far and wide as I possibly can, because the more and more people that become aware of it, the more and more we can demand the change from the dentist that they actually have. Like, I want people globally to walk into their dentist and say, I want a quantum kid. And then the dentist is like, what's that? And then they'll be like, well, go and do Jalal's course or something because I want a quantum kid.
I think it's fantastic. And this is one of those things that just, Dr. Ken Berry called it country boy common sense. It makes sense. If you really just listen to what you just said, it makes so much sense. I want to jump on to the topic of another dentist, Dr. Weston A. Price. And so what did he have right, and what do you feel like I think his work was absolutely amazing. What do you think maybe he missed that just wasn't a part of the overall puzzle pieces that he put together?
He missed the environment. So he was right about the food, and there are a lot of functional dentists out there saying that nutrition is critical to optimal dental and jaw development, and I believe that to be true. And they're saying that based off the teachings of Weston A. Price. But I still feel that they're missing one big piece of the puzzle, which is what I just laid out with the whole craniosacral mechanism, etc. Like, you physically can't grow jaws properly in a head that's jammed up. It's just not possible. So what Weston A. Price was missing was the fact that the subjects that he was exploring were that he was assessing were always in sunlight. They were always grounded. They were using their bodies functionally for how their bodies should be used. They probably weren't wearing shoes, all these types of things. And so the musculoskeletal system for these people growing up was being loaded with the right input signals posturally to help facilitate and drive growth of all the important mechanisms throughout the body. And I mean, one could argue that yes, the main difference between like subject group A and subject group B was the fact that, one was eating a more Western based diet, because they were both like, in sunlight and both grounding, etc. Which is why I say that there is some truth to the fact that nutrition has a big role to play. We've got to have our vitamin D from the sun. We've got to have our vitamin K2 from, beef liver, for instance. So we've got to have all of that. I don't discard that at all, but I think with modern society and the way that we are living, we have kind of completely moved away from nature. We're not using our body the way that we should be using it. And so the functional neurology is not there, the craniosacral mechanism is not there, and or it's not optimal. And so that's why we're seeing an epidemic of smaller jaws. And it's not just a nutrition thing. I mean, my kids are in treatment. I'm straightening out their jaws and mouth, and the changes that I've seen in them are phenomenal, like facial changes, gut health changes, all this type of stuff. And they were already pretty healthy. But I mean, the happiest thing that I can say about their treatment, and maybe I'm a bit bias is that, my son just looks so bloody handsome and my daughter looks bloody gorgeous. And, I could kiss them all day. And the reason why they look so beautiful is because when you have optimal function, then you have like optimal form. Beautiful people look beautiful because they're functioning properly. So it's that's the generation of quantum kids will all be beautiful kids as well.
Love it. Let's go into that environment piece a little bit more, because the light issue is there's a lot of information in there that is conflicting. Stay out of the sun is causing cancer, it's doing this, it's doing that. And so when we get that wrong, like, it's bad, is what I'm seeing and I'm understanding based on Jack and a lot of others' work. And so what do you do, say, as a parent, as how do your kids embrace sunlight?
So the first thing we do when we wake up in the morning is we go outside and we get some natural light into the eyes. And that's absolutely critical. It just kind of gets the system back online after a good night's sleep, etc. That's the first thing. And then, it depends on the day. My children go to school, so it depends on like the school routine. It may be 5 minutes and maybe 20 minutes or more. And then it's some sort of grounding throughout the day. And that might be in the morning, that might be, my son might do it at lunchtime. Like, he's so aware of all these things, even at 7, 8 years old, that like he looks for opportunities to ground or get more sunlight. And then in the evenings, there's always a bit of grounding. So there's that component, which we are making more of an effort as a family living in a city to have more nature walks, etc. as well. But from a sunlight perspective, that morning sunlight is the safest sunlight to start with as you start to return to the concept of getting more sunlight onto your skin and into your eyes. And the reason that morning sunlight is safer is because it's lower in UV. And so it's got more infrared light in it. And what that does is it actually primes your body for UV light exposure later on in the day. So we need people to, when they return to the sun after listening to someone talk about quantum biology and understanding the importance of the sun, I don't want them to go back into the sun at lunchtime the first time and, bathe in a really strong UV light and then burn their skin and then think, oh, the sun's just not working, like it's not right, whatever that person was saying. We have to do it properly. And so it starts with morning sun exposure. And it's just a controlled dose, so to speak, of like 20, 30 minutes. And then you can slowly build that up. And then once you've been in that morning sunlight for a bit, you can go inside, make breakfast or do whatever you need to do. And then later on in the late morning or around lunchtime, that's when you go out and you get some UV light. And you may not be ready for too much UV light. It may only be 5 or 10 minutes, depending on the strength of the sun that day. And that's okay. And your skin may start to become red, which is normal, because the UV light is resulting in the release of something called nitric oxide, which brings the blood to the surface. And so the redness in your skin after a bit of UV sunlight exposure is actually just blood pooling and coming to the surface. It's not a sunburn at the moment. And so, expose yourself a little bit more and then go in the shade. You don't even need to go inside, just go in the shade. Obviously, no sunglasses, because sunglasses are blocking the signal coming into your eyes, and that UV light signal into your eyes tells the skin to lay down melanin, and melanin is UV protective. So it's kind of like we want UV, but we don't want too much UV, and the body knows how much UV we need. Based on the amount of melanin that we have. I need more sunlight exposure than you, Logan. That's just a pigmentation thing, because I have more melanin on my skin, and so I'm more resistant to UV light exposure. So I need to get much more UV light exposure than you in order to make the same amount of vitamin D. So these like all little nuances to like sunlight exposure about how much and when to come in and how much does one person need compared to another. And they're all very important to know for someone that's looking at returning back to the sun.
Yeah, no, fantastic. I think that's beautiful advice. So, can you go into the magic of melanin? I think that's something that a lot of people don't fully appreciate and understand that melanin is so much more than a tan or simply color.
Exactly. So the melanin is this molecule that is deeply, deeply or darkly pigmented. So it's basically black. There's different types. There's a eumelanin, a neuromelanin, and pheomelanin. But if we just think of it as just melanin, it's this dark pigmented molecule that basically behaves like a black hole. And a black hole is something in quantum physics that traps light, all light frequencies. It's kind of like a vacuum. It just sucks it all in. And so that's what melanin does. The key thing that it does, though, is that it takes UV light and it amplifies that light and uses that light to split water into hydrogen gas, oxygen gas, and electrons. And all of those three products from melanin using UV light to split water, all of those three products have a key role to play in mitochondrial health. And we might talk on that later. In addition to that, melanin has been known to chelate heavy metals, so it's really good at clearing out heavy metals like mercury, etc. The other thing about melanin is that it's not just on our surface. So it's in our eyes, it's in our skin, it's in our gut lining. So we've got these enterocytes, which are the gut cells that line the gut. They're packed with melanin. It's in our brain. But what we know is, and a lot of Dr. Jack Kruse's work has brought this to light, is that melanin, like it's deep inside the body as well, in the deeper layers, because the gut is still a surface. But if we look at the deeper layers throughout the body, it's in our blood vessels, it's in our brain, etc. The melanin is there. And what usually happens is that we build melanin on the outside of our skin and we send that deep into our body. And so that melanin is not just something which is on the surface, it's deep inside of our body, and it receives UV light that our body makes and uses that UV light to split water into hydrogen, oxygen, and electrons.
Oh, so on the movement of melanin, this is something I'm fascinated with, and I don't really know why. So how melanin is produced. Okay, so it is my understanding that it's very copper dependent. So through the pan enzyme, the tyrosine, and melanogenesis has got to have that in order to function properly. So if the melanin is moving from the skin, right, to wherever it needs to be, do we know that mechanism yet? Is it the melanocytes moving? Is it the melanin moving? What is vitiligo? So like, have you thought about all of that?
Really, really good questions. So we know that melanin is in immune cells, and we know immune cells can travel throughout the body, because you might have like an injury to your hand, and then there might be a local immune response where immune cells will come and they'll help to heal the hand, right? So that's kind of like the premise upon which we can definitively say that melanin can travel throughout the body, because it can via the immune cells. Can the melanocytes travel themselves? I'm not sure. They probably could. I just don't know the details to that question. But we can safely say that melanin can move through different tissues or layers throughout the body based on the pure fact that we know that immune cells can move, and immune cells have melanin inside of them. They have POMC inside of them, essentially, which is the kind of father hormone peptide that melanin comes from. In terms of like vitiligo, so when we have there is an enzyme called, I think it's called catalase, and catalase breaks down hydrogen peroxide, but blue light destroys catalase. So when you have excessive blue light, then the mechanism that we have in our skin to break down excess hydrogen peroxide, that mechanism is gone. And so then we have excess hydrogen peroxide in our skin. And we know that hydrogen peroxide is bleach, vitiligo. And so vitiligo is a disease of, or a condition of, excessive blue light and insufficient sunlight exposure.
Mm.
When it comes to
that would also lead to maybe like gray hair as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, gray hair is a lack of melanin in the hair. And so another one, for instance, is melanoma, which is like a super hot topic. But like with melanoma, many of my patients in my dental clinic who have a history of melanoma, just out of interest, I asked them, whereabouts on your body was the melanoma? And this is all anecdotal, but I'm going to say at least 8 or 9 out of 10 patients who have had a melanoma in my dental clinic. Obviously, I'm not treating the melanoma. I'm just asking out of interest. The melanoma is on a part of the body that regularly doesn't see the sun. You know, it could be on the left buttock. It could be on the back. And I ask these people, if you don't mind me asking, does that area of your body see the sun much? And they're always saying, no, it doesn't see the sun at all. So like in my head, I'm thinking, well, how can that be a disease of sunlight? Because it's a part of the body that doesn't see the sunlight. And so what Dr. Jack Kruse postulates, and he probably wouldn't even use the word postulate, he's adamant about it, is that and I think he's right, is that the melanin is so deficient, the melanin deep inside our body is so deficient in light that it has to move to the surface to try and grab light in order to then take it back down into the deep tissues of the body. So why is there a melanoma on the back or on the left bum cheek, etc.? Because the skin has something called dermatomes through it. And dermatomes are like areas of skin which are connected to a deeper tissue inside of the body. And so if you have someone that has a melanoma in a weird and wonderful position, you can look at which dermatome that is in, and then you can connect that to which deep tissue or organ that lines up with, and you can basically work out which deep tissue or organ is deficient in melanin. And sometimes the location on the skin surface is not necessarily kind of right next to the tissue in question, deep inside. Like it could be traveling a fair distance to, like, you know, diagonally. So that's kind of like the melanin story. I mean, when it comes to mitochondria, we've got something called the electron transport chain. And with the electron transport chain, there's 5 proteins. And we've got electrons funneling in from the start. And then they're traveling across, they're quantum tunneling across from one to the next. And they end up at the 4th protein at something called oxygen. So these 5 proteins, I kind of like to just describe them as like 5 cylinders of a car. And you've just got like the fuel traveling through, and that fuel is electrons. So oxygen is what we will call the terminal electron acceptor. It's the last guy that picks up the electrons. Okay? So that's the oxygen piece. As the electrons are passing through, protons are getting pumped up. And they're kind of accumulating up here. And those protons then need to come back down into the mitochondria, because you've got all these protons up here, and anything in chemistry or medicine where you get a gradient, where you get excessive amounts on one side, it wants to travel down the hill back to a flat surface, so to speak. So the protons are accumulating, and then they come down. Remember, oxygen was at number 4. The protons come down through the 5th cylinder, which is called ATP synthase. And as the protons come down, that's how ATP is made. And those protons, which is an H+, okay, they then join to the O2, which has received the electron, because you've got a negatively charged O2, you've got a positively charged H+, opposites attract. So they join together, and that's how you get H2O. So our body makes water purely metabolic water, purely from the process of metabolism. As the electrons are traveling across, inevitably a few will escape. And the few that escape are what we would call free radicals. They're like escaped electrons that can tackle an oxygen and make it a singlet oxygen or superoxide. And so there's like 3 or 4 oxidants that can develop inside the mitochondria. And it's kind of just like a car has an exhaust, and there's got to be a bit of a blow off of steam. Those free radicals are actually the signal to tell the DNA what's going on in the environment. So we need to have a little bit of an exhaust. And the DNA uses those cues to then determine, okay, I need to read this protein this way, or this DNA sequence this way to make that protein. If the signal changes, the DNA might read the same sequence but in a different way, leading to making of a different protein. This is why Dr. Jack Kruse says that it's your environment that dictates the genes, because the DNA is just a software, but the person that's typing on the keyboard that's affecting the software on the computer is the mitochondria sending the free radicals. But the mitochondria are the environmental sensors. So when you're eating processed foods, when you're not getting enough sunlight, when you're not getting enough electrons via grounding, etc., then the mitochondria are sending too many free radicals. And that's an excess of oxidants that are then damaging the DNA, they're damaging the mitochondrial DNA, etc., etc. The cool thing, though, is that we have something called molecular hydrogen that can neutralize all of the oxidants. And molecular hydrogen is H2. Okay? We don't want to neutralize all the oxidants, we just want to neutralize some of them, because we need to still allow the oxidants to go and tell the DNA what to do, right? So that's, in a nutshell, that's mitochondrial, dynamics, okay? Melanin produces oxygen when it splits water with UV light. Melanin also produces hydrogen gas, and it also produces electrons. Don't the electrons feed in to the mitochondria? Isn't the oxygen there to receive the electrons? Isn't molecular hydrogen there to mop up the excess oxidants? So this is why melanin is the magic molecule, because it literally provides your body with the bare essentials that it needs for you to produce structured water and for you to produce ATP, which is why when you are in sunlight more, you feel less need to eat.
You going through that just made something click for me. And my dear friend, Dr. Petra, is going to be like, Logan, how did you not get this yet? And then, Laszlo Boros is going to probably shake his head. When you talked about this proton gradient, this is why deuterium is so detrimental, in that it breaks the ATP synthase and it backlogs even more. It's really that simple, isn't it?
Yep. It is. And so then the mitochondria breaks down, and the only thing that can save the mitochondria is melatonin, because melatonin is responsible for autophagy and apoptosis inside the mitochondria. But melatonin is degraded by excessive blue light. And so we're set up to fail with our modern lifestyles.
Well, do you care to go into the deuterium topic a little bit from your understanding, and why that is such a problem? And I feel like it is such a big deal, an important piece of this, and yet it gets no attention in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at matter, everything is built of hydrogen, and we must know about hydrogen and its different types in order to really know about health and biology and biophysics, etc. So anybody that is not understanding hydrogen and its different isotopes is sadly just not really at the apex of where they need to be. So hydrogen has different isotopes, which are basically different forms of hydrogen that have more protons and neutrons inside of them, or more neutrons inside of them. And so the base form of hydrogen is something called protium. So when most people say protons, they mean protium. And protons or protium is where you have a nucleus that has one proton inside of it, which is a positively charged quantum particle, and then you have an electron that surrounds the nucleus. Now, and so you've got a positive on the inside and a negative on the outside. And that's hydrogen. The thing about deuterium is that it has an extra neutron inside the nucleus. And the neutron has a neutral charge. So it doesn't actually change the charge of the proton, but it does double the weight because the neutron weighs almost the same as a proton. And then you still have the electron on the outside. You with me so far?
Yep.
So what happens is you have someone like me who weighs 72 kilos, but in this same frame, I'm now weighing 144 kilos. So I'm a heavy hydrogen. So deuterium is a heavy form of hydrogen. It's a heavy form of protium. And so what happens is like we have something inside of our mitochondria called the TCA cycle, which is like an important metabolic pathway that has 9 steps. And those 9 steps, or I think it's 8 or 9, basically they do the job of one simple thing: cutting a glucose down into 2 3-carbon chains. Glucose is a 6-carbon chain, and basically it gets snipped into 3-carbon chains. So why would nature, Logan, require 9 steps to do something as simple as cutting a 6-carbon chain into 2? And the reason why is because as the glucose gets cycled through those 9 enzymatic steps, enzyme comes in, does its thing, goes away, moves to the next. It's like a conveyor belt, right? Every single one of those steps is checking all the hydrogens on the glucose to make sure that they're not deuterium. And so what the end result is, you've got 3 pyruvates, which is the 3-carbon chains. You've got 2 pyruvates, which don't have any deuterium on them. And so this is how the body sequesters or pushes aside the deuterium so that we just have protiums in the system. But when we have a breakdown in the TCA cycle, and when we have and some of that is just due to the fact that we just overload the system with so much deuterium because of the processed foods that we're eating. They're just so loaded with deuterium. I mean, even like plants and vegetables and fruits that are grown in greenhouse gases, they're higher in greenhouses. They're higher in deuterium because they're not receiving the natural sunlight. Because you've got this layer of a greenhouse which is allowing the sunlight to come in, and I'm saying this because it's kind of it's relevant to your work. You've got light bends through matter, so when you put a piece of matter in between light and the desired subject to receive the light, or object to receive the light's going to bend. And that's how food that is grown in greenhouses is not as healthy as what people think. Anyway, I digress. So
no, that's important.
I mean, well, it's the same reason why sunscreen doesn't work. Like some people are like, they're pretty, I mean, yes, there's the chemicals inside the sunscreen, and I get all of that, but there are other people that are like, oh, but there's this really healthy organic sunscreen that has like a zinc oxide or something like that. I'm like, I don't care whether it's healthy or not. It's still a layer between you and the sun, and light bends through that. And so it changes the light signal that your body receives. It's as simple as that. It's basic physics. But yeah, coming back to what I was saying, so that TCA cycle is kind of picking and choosing and sequestering out the deuterium. But if we overload the system, we get too much deuterium. So the deuterium accumulates above those 5 cylinders, those 5 proteins. And then it's too heavy to fit through the 5th one, the ATP synthase. And so then the mitochondria breaks down. But there's other things as well. Like, I mean, deuterium, it's a hydrogen essentially. And there is the 2 DNA strands. It's like a double helix. Okay, but each strand of the helix is joined together by hydrogen bonds. Okay, so it's kind of like, the rungs of a ladder. Yeah, so they're joined together by its hydrogen bonds. But what if one of those hydrogens is deuterium? Testosterone has 28 hydrogens on the molecule. What if some of those are deuterium? What if structured water becomes full of deuterium? The significance of deuterium is that it behaves completely differently under light. Because it's heavier, it requires more light in order to move it. And that's just a simple E equals mc squared. The energy required to, the mass, the m, is deuterium. And in order to create the same amount of energy, you're going to need more light to move that heavier mass. But we're deficient in light, which is why the foods that are higher in deuterium are found in latitudes that are closer to the equator, because the sunlight is so strong that it can clear the deuterium out of those people. Because the power and density of the light is so much stronger. That's why coconuts are only found near the equator. Because the coconut water, which is high in deuterium, it's okay for the locals to drink it because they're going to be in a really strong sun that's going to move it. So, I mean, in a nutshell, deuterium isn't just a mitochondrial story about ATP synthase breaking down. It has a completely different magnetic response to the Earth's magnetism. It's got a different it's called a magnetic monopole. It's got a completely different strength of hydrogen bonds. So the bonds are shorter and the bonds are less elastic. So then there's less spring. So then there's less reception of environmental information, because like DNA is a coil for a reason. It's like a slinky. It's got to have that kind of like bounce to it to receive the environmental frequencies. But if it's full of deuterium, then it has less bounce to it, so it's less responsive. So these are like some of the considerations of deuterium in a nutshell.
I think that was fantastic. I absolutely loved it. Trying to real quick, just a complete tangent. I have thoroughly loved this conversation. This was everything that I had hoped that it would be, but something that I'm curious your take. How do you, as a man of faith, rationalize the science that seems to go in the opposite direction? With every say evolution, science, however you want to package it. How do you just personally, for my own interest, how do you deal with that?
As in, like, science is too science, is the question like science is so sciencey and it's like less about like faith and trust and submission? Is that
sure? Or like the lack thereof God, or the lack thereof of creation in a way that it just seems to me that science and religion or faith seem to be at odds more often than not. Whereas in my personal opinion, I see more crossover than I do see it at odds. But I was just curious on how you viewed all that.
I believe quantum physics is the bridge. So I believe that quantum physics explains so much about faith. And to me, it has strengthened my faith in God. Learning more about quantum physics deeply strengthened my faith. And I was already, fairly practicing, fairly devout, but like it's just on another level now. There's more respect and submission to the greatness of God, because like beautiful things like quantum entanglement, quantum tunneling, etc., like the scientists at CERN can research that and collide particles against each other and do all these weird and wonderful things. But like at the end of the day, it's like there is something that has created all of this, and yeah, for me, God is the ultimate creator. So it has definitely helped to ground me. And I think the reason why people find it appealing to, or find what I share online appealing, is just because I kind of do my best to connect the two, in a way which is not like it's this way and this is the only way. It's more kind of like, how beautiful is this, guys? Like, isn't this just magical? So yeah, it's definitely, I mean, quantum physics for me and learning all this quantum biology has been a revelation, and something which has really changed my life for the better. Like, I mean, if you'll humor me, but I believe that all physical diseases don't actually start in the physical body. There's multiple layers to our body. I mean, everybody's probably heard of like the mind-body connection, etc. And so I read a book by a quantum physicist, actually, who his name is Amit Goswami, and he was explaining how in his mind there are 5 layers to the human body, and the base layer is the physical body, and then above that is what he calls the vital body. So that's kind of like your acupuncture meridians, the traditional Chinese medicine. That's your Ayurvedic chakras. That is like the Indian ancient medicine, where you've got the 7 kind of energy centers throughout the midline. That's that concept. So that's your vital body. That's kind of like the electricity that's flowing through you. And then above the vital body, you've got the mind. And above the mind, you've got the soul. And then above the soul, you've got your soul's connection to source, which is God. And so what I believe is that every physical disease on the planet, for everybody, starts at the level of the soul. And the reason is because there are so many that are disconnected from God, and they're being led by corporations, they're being led by societal programming. They've sadly experienced traumas along the way. Like, it might be trauma from parents, or trauma from Big Brother, or school trauma, or sexual trauma, God forbid, all these types of things. And they injure the soul, and an injured soul will then change the decisions that that person makes in their mind, and that will lead them down the road of hanging out with the wrong people, or starting to take substances, or leaning on psychedelics to escape, or alcohol to escape, as opposed to doing the inner work themselves. Or it might lead them to eat unhealthy food, so take a job which is based on money, because mum and dad never had any money, and in pursuing money, and their healthy sacrifice, etc., etc. Like, I'm just taking out examples, like throwing out examples to demonstrate my point, that it's an injured soul that drives the decisions that we make. And then the decisions that we make in our mind, then they affect our vital body, and then finally that affects our physical body. And so it's really, really important that we understand this, because Western medicine believes that all the issues start in the physical body, and it's like an upwards causation. So if you have an issue in your mind, it's because of a physical body thing. Whereas I'm like, it's a downwards causation. It starts at the top and works its way down. And if we as parents don't heal from our traumas, then we pass those traumas on to our children. And then those traumas can reveal themselves as physical diseases in our children. And so I'm very passionate about educating the people that I work with or talk with about the way that I think. I believe it to be true. And I feel that really we are playing a game called alchemy, which is an alignment of mind, body, and soul. There's like the old-fashioned scientific alchemy where you're turning a base metal into gold, but we are all playing a game of spiritual alchemy where we're aligning our mind, body, and soul. And so that means a submission to God. That means healing yourself and putting in the work to heal yourself. And in doing so, that's how your soul starts to heal, your mind starts to make better decisions, your physical body starts to become its best version. and you become the best father that you can for your kids and the best husband for your wife.
I love that, my friend. Thank you for the wisdom and sharing, your story and everything that you've done. And I can't wait to follow up, my friend. So much.
That's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time.
Thank you for joining us on Sowing Prosperity. Be sure to follow along across the social media platforms, including YouTube, and be sure to go to sowingprosperity.com.